Malcolm X. If you aren't careful, the newspapers will have you hating the people who are being oppressed and loving the people who are doing the oppressing. So, I mean, that in itself is a kind of perfect example of how state media and the state narrative can be used to control the public domain of information in order to correlate a discourse in the public sphere where people can be encouraged to believe that the victims are the transgressors and that transgressors are actually the victims. And we see that playing out, and that playbook playing out, especially when it comes to Israel and the destabilization of West Asia. We've seen it coming to the fore now in Syria, where we've seen the destruction of the Syrian Arab Republic, a country that under its constitution protected all the minorities. So that would be the Alawites, that would be the Christians, that would be the Kurds and others who were all living under the government of President Bashar al-Assad. So I think it's actually important always to put things in context. So if you don't mind, if we'll go back in history and then come forward again. I mean, in history, in Christianity, it was the churches, it was the priest, it was the people who were in the top echelons of the church who were able to read. They were taught Latin, they were able to read, they were able to use the pulpit. I see the pulpit as an early kind of media center, where people were given information, potentially brainwashed by the people in charge, trying to control the people in the church and in wider society through the aspects of religion. Then with the development of the printing press, then we had the ability for news and alternative views from that of the church and the likes of the Christian Bible to be exposed to a wider audience. So one of the biggest things in journalism and one of the biggest things in the history of mankind was the invention of the printing press. So then we got like alternative media, we got alternative views. We maybe started hearing what the Germans thought about different things, what the French thought about different things, the Americans, Arabia, China, Russia. So it opened up a Pandora's box of information. But then that information slowly became controlled. So initially, it would have been in the hands of journalists, print newspapers, editors who had an editorial stance. That editorial stance, up until maybe the 1990s, would have gone from the far left to the far right. You could walk into a newsagent and pick up any number of news titles and editorials that would give you a worldview based from communism all the way through to capitalism and fascism. So there was a wide range and a wide discourse within the public arena. Then you had the consolidation of the media, both through television and the printed media and radio. In many places, it is in the hands of 5 or 6 corporations that may have 100 or 150 or 200 newspapers, television stations, radio stations. We'll pick, say, the United States or Britain. Then you have the established governmental media. So we have the BBC here. You have like CNN in America, not run by the government, but very much follows the governmental policies. You have ABC in Australia. So you have all these, and you have the Welt, and you have Le Monde. So you have some in the Times of London. You have some prestigious newspapers that are all following an external editorial line, which is not only in line with governmental interior and exterior, domestic and foreign policy, but also in favour of the globalization of this new world order. So you basically have the white Saxon English American sphere of influence that speaks with one voice when it comes to Russia, when it comes to China, when it comes to Palestine, West Asia, Africa, Latin America, and the Caribbean. So we have gone from a plethora of independent news outlets to a consolidation which allows a group of elite oligarchs who are in bed with their governments and global corporations and globalization to convince the people who watch their media that this is the truth and that this is reality. And the second thing to come on from the printing press is the internet, because now on the internet we can, if we choose, we take the time and we are selective and critical in our analysis and thinking of what we read and what we hear and what we see. We now have an alternative to this established media which wants to control us. It wants to brainwash us. It wants to say, look over here at what's happening here and let's forget what's happening over there because it doesn't suit the narrative of the governments that are in power. So global media, I've seen programs where someone put up a clip of like ABC in New Zealand talking about a political incident somewhere in the world, and then they put up CNN, and then they put up the BBC, and they went from channel to channel, from country to country, and they showed the exact same phrases in the exact same order being spouted as propaganda from hundreds of television studios. I mean, who sits down and gives this same narrative, the exact same words, with the exact same interpretation and the exact same strength of the words of what they're using? And this is like sent out globally. There's no way people in Australia are saying exactly the same thing as people in New York, exactly the same thing as the BBC in London. So there's obviously some overriding control in the editorials. And maybe just to finish, we have censorship in the media, which prevents us from learning the truth. We have journalists who know the truth and won't tell us the truth because they are self-censoring, because they know if they write an article or they create a program which is against the orthodoxy of the time, that it will not be printed, it will not be aired. So these people who claim to be independent journalists working on behalf of truth and justice are actually the opposite. They are in a camp of people who are trying to control the media narrative that's exposed to the general public in order to convince people who are working every day, who are taking their kids to school, who are taking their kids to football practice, the swimming practice, the Irish dancing, whatever the kids are into. They're taking care of elder parents. They don't have time working 40, 50, 60 hours a week to indulge the way I can, to go on the internet and find alternative sources of truth and information. These people sit down at 6 o'clock when they're having their dinner, having had a long day at work, having maybe concerns on their mind about money and Christmas and how they're going to get through the festivities. And they sit and watch the 6 o'clock news, or they sit and watch the 10 o'clock news, and it's just propaganda from start to finish. And then when you ask them what's happening in Syria or Palestine or Israel or Venezuela or Iran or China or Ukraine and the Donbass and the Russian special military operation, they don't really know, because they're being fed a tissue of propaganda, and mixed in with that is a dose of confusion. So even though they're being propagandized, they're being confused at the same time, so that when they sit back, if you ask what's happening in Donbass, what started in 2014 with the coup in Kiev, people won't know. They'll just say, oh, well, the people wanted change, they got rid of the old government, they brought in a new one, then the Russians attacked, and people are left without a real analysis of the truth, which is why programs like this and Press TV and Have It Out with Galloway and other shows are so important, because it gives us an opportunity. I don't want to hear an alternative. An alternative is not necessarily the truth. I want to hear the truth, and I want to hear it from people I trust. And to find that, I have to go onto the internet.
Thank you so much, Farah, for giving a deeper meaning and the reason behind the media and how it has been, I mean, how the truth has been taken over and the kind of world we are living in and the kind of propaganda machine which is working around and how it is impacting. So, Sakia, how important it is for general public is to connect with the truth, because as Farah has mentioned very important factors regarding media is the fifth pillar of state, and it is very important for understanding what's going on. For instance, everyone doesn't have time, as Farah suggested in his discussion as well, that to go and figure out what is truth and what is going on and what is exactly the truth, because things we see in through televisions or print media or whatsoever, how much do you think the facts or the truth is twisted, and how much important it is for us as a common people to understand truth and follow the truth, because where it is leading when we are following the media which is just sharing some kind of twisted facts or incomplete facts or maybe true facts, but in a way that helps their narrative. For instance, the narrative, for instance, the political elite wants, or the money mafias wants, or whatsoever. So how do you see the whole thing?
Thank you, Sister Faiza, for having me. So I think, first of all, when we talk about the media, I think, the ethos of what journalism is all about is very different in terms of the textbook and in reality. I remember what really attracted me to journalism in the first place was all these ideals of a fair and free and balanced reporting, and being the voice of the voiceless and talking the truth, and in reality, everything that I learned at university is completely opposite to what really happens in the field. And from the very beginning of my journalism career in Tanzania, and I've worked, I have practiced journalism in UK, in the US, and in Africa. One thing that is common is that there is no such thing as a completely free media. Anyone who invests in a media outlet has already got an agenda. So this idea that there is any one media that you can follow that will completely give you the entire truth, I think is not really a fact. However, there are levels of the interferences in the media that happen. So there are those whereby you pretty much is left to professionals with obviously some kind of a line that you need to follow. And then there is the Western media, which is completely biased when it comes to foreign policy. So, having said that, how much is it important for us to have the truth? Truth is everything. It's the truth. And the idea that you would not get involved because it doesn't make a difference to you in your daily life means that you are stepping back and allowing this small group of people around the world to control the world in every aspect of the way, whether that is the psychologically or how they set. So like Fra was talking there, people are very much concerned with the day-to-day life. People are busy, they need to put food on the table, they need to worry about the children's education, but in the process I think they forget that the big blocks of all that running smoothly in our day-to-day life, we are leaving up to politicians. And when we don't question this truth, when we don't actively seek out what the reality is, then they have no interest in making our lives any better. It, and even if you're talking of foreign policy or issues that are not connected to us here, the repercussions do come to each and every one of us. If you look at the what is happening around the world today and the level of the status of the world, what is happening in Palestine, what has happened in Syria, that has effect on us, ordinary people over here. And that is for everyone, despite of the what culture, what faith you have, it does have repercussions, because when you keep quiet about one kind of atrocities happening somewhere, and you do not actively challenge that, then when it comes to your doorstep, you will not be able to do anything, and more importantly, nobody will be able to speak out for you. So, having said that, I think there are different ways in which media is controlled around the world. The biggest challenge I see at the moment, especially in the UK, is this use of this Terrorism Act of October of 2024. Which has really been silencing, pinpointing well-known journalists who do not adhere to the mainstream stories when it comes to covering Palestine, and they are using this Terrorism Act, which are really harsh laws. You can be in prison for 14 years for simply, writing the truth, and the charges can be based on any whimsical ideas of you having, for example, supported a proscribed group, even when you are not. So, I mean, I think we are going through a significant threat. There is always sort of been, not been a free media. There's always been people who have interest in ensuring that their version of the truth is out there. But at the moment, I think the psychological warfare that is happening is massive in the media, and therefore there has never been more of a time when we need to know this and be aware of it than now.
Thank you, Sister Sakina. Farah, what are your thoughts? Because as Sister Sakina shared some of her experience as well. And when I was graduating and study journalism, I mean, when we used to study it, and we used to look at the things from theoretical perspective, we used to feel like, oh my God, it's a wonderful thing we need to do. And when we studied law, we saw like there is a freedom of expression, and we are supposed to express ourselves freely and all that. So how much do you think today we do have freedom of expression? Do you think the people who are, especially from a journalistic perspective and the activism perspective, when we look at the things and people try to expose the truth, just like, for example, Julian Assange, if we can take his example, he suffered many years because of the truth he exposed and he shared about or something. So when it comes to truth, people are like there are charges which are like they have to suffer in jails, and they have to spend so many years in there, and we don't know what happens over there with them, and it's very, very painful. Discuss, I think so, a couple of weeks before Sister Fatima Zainab's case. Sister Sakina knows that, and with other 2-3 girls who were like standing up for truth and justice for Gaza. And I mean, this is something happened that from past 1 year they are in jails, and, for example, facing kind of terrorism act charges from criminal damage to terrorism charges. So how do you see this situation? How much it is like kind of sabotaging the element of truth which should be exposed, and the kind of effort people want to put in exposing the truth, and they see that these are the consequences they might have to face. So what are your thoughts on that, and what other things you would like to add in it?
Well, I think what I would like to say is, if we look at state media as propaganda, so we have a war of ideology, a war of words, and what we have is this building of a consensus within the public sphere in order to create public support for a certain foreign policy, or indeed a certain domestic policy within each individual country. I'll give you one example of how propaganda works. Whenever they told us that Saddam Hussein had weapons of mass destruction that he could launch within 5 minutes and hit anywhere in Europe and hit the UK, and how this was a mad dictator with his finger on the trigger, possibly exterminating millions of people, even I fell for the propaganda. When we heard that there were people being executed in jails, that there were dissident prisoners who were being beaten and tortured, I thought to myself, well, my God, if this is true, surely we have to do something. So, hand on heart, I thought it was the right thing to do to go into Iraq in order to take out the teeth of these chemical weapons. That is the power of propaganda. When someone like myself 20 years ago was convinced by the state narrative and by the propaganda that this was a rogue regime and basically we were all under threat and all in danger. That's how propaganda works. You make the bogeyman, you create the threat, you then offer the solution and the resolution. And in that case, it was an illegal war against Iraq. And when you saw people like George Galloway and 2 million other people standing outside Parliament demanding no intervention in Iraq in order to protect civilian lives from what became shock and awe and the destruction of Iraq, 600,000 Iraqi babies basically murdered through the sanctions prior to the military intervention in Iraq. That's how propaganda works. So they convince people that this is what must be done in order to get public support behind what it is the government plans doing. Now, when you talk about Julian Assange, he exposed the collateral damage video of the Americans murdering people in Iraq from helicopters. He exposed, I believe, the Clinton emails that talked about Gaddafi and talked about other situations where they were actively conspiring to overthrow a sovereign nation in the interest not of the people of those nations, but in the interest of global corporates who wanted, and corporations who wanted to get the oil and wanted to get the gas and wanted to get the water and wanted to take all the resources out that they used to do through military occupation 100 years ago, 200 years ago, and they're back at that. If it's not financial occupation, then it's military intervention. So then you have the people who come out and say, hold on guys, what they're telling us isn't true, and here are the facts. And then they give us the facts. And then people begin to question the state narrative. And then when people begin to question the state narrative, the state goes, hey, we must stop this. We are losing control of the population. We are losing control of the public space and the narrative that they have controlled for perhaps the last 100 years and definitely the last 50. So you make false charges against Julian Assange. You put him in prison. You send out a signal to everybody else. This is what happens if you stand up against the state. Now, this terrorism act that they have in the UK, Richard Medhurst, I believe, was taken off the plane and questioned and threatened under this that he would be jailed. There was a lady in her 70s somewhere in Britain, I'm sure Sakina could maybe give us her name, I've forgotten it, and she was arrested. There's a girl called Charlotte Cates who is in Canada, and she is a coordinator, a national coordinator for Palestinian prisoners' rights in Canada. They sent a SWAT team to her door. They sent 20 armed men in military trucks who threw stun grenades into the property to arrest a woman in her 40s. All they had to do was knock the door and ask her to come with them for questioning. They made her look like a terrorist. They made this look like a siege on someone who might have bombs or might have weapons. And again, it's a signal to others. Craig Murray left the UK and went to Cyprus because he was concerned that the truth-telling that he was exposing in the Donbass, which is an alternative to the UK NATO coverage of what's happening in the Donbass and eastern Ukraine. He has feared for his personal kind of freedom, and he's gone to Cyprus. So we have a plethora of people who have a high profile. There was a Palestinian journalist, I believe, who had over 2 million followers on Twitter, and they have just cancelled him and deplatformed him. So what you have is the state narrative of lies and propaganda, in my opinion, being challenged by the truth speakers and the people who want to inform, which is what journalism should be about, telling the truth, giving people the facts, allowing people to make their own decisions and not be told what's happening and told what is the perceived truth, that narrative at that time. So they're deplatforming people. They're threatening people with jail. They are indeed, I think, people in America have been arrested and subjected to imprisonment for speaking the truth. So when they talk about totalitarian, authoritarian states in other parts of the world, we don't have to look much past London or Berlin or Paris or Washington to see what totalitarian, authoritarian states are all about when they're deplatforming people. People have been sacked in the different media outlets across this white Anglo-Saxon sphere of the media, and professors like David Miller and Tim Anderson have all been sacked from their jobs purely because they spoke out against the genocide in Palestine. So basically, what we're looking at is anyone who has a profile, anyone who has a large following on social media, is a target of the deep state who want to prevent them from challenging that deep state narrative.
Thank you, Farah. So, Sakina, what are your thoughts? What Farah has mentioned, what kind of challenges truth is facing, if we take it in that way? Because at the moment, truth is something which is being played out in many ways, as many of examples Farah has mentioned. And when we talk about the democratic state, so when, for example, as Farah mentioned, the Iraq war, millions of people were on the roads and they were chanting that we don't want war. And even in Gaza, for instance, we have seen millions of people on the roads every weekend, or thousands of people who are fighting to divestment from, for example, Zionist things or businesses or whatsoever, and to end the war and end the genocide and all that. But where is democracy when they don't listen to the people, their voices, and few of them who are brave enough, courageous enough, and who can sacrifice everything they have in terms of like we have discussed some examples recently as well. So what do you think are the challenges, and how we can overcome the fear and the threats which comes with the truth? So how one can be standing up with the truth and still be able to brave enough to face those challenges? Sister, I can't hear you. Yeah, now it's fine.
Yeah. So when you talk about democracy and the freedom of the press, and these are all really selective democracy for when it suits certain people, and same for the freedom of press. I was just listening to press conference, state of Secretary State of in the U.S. Kirby was being asked about Bashar al-Assad and whether he should appear at the ICC, and he said yes. And he was asked if you how can you condone that when you have been against the ICC's judgment for Netanyahu? And he just said, because Israel is different. And they were trying to ask him, there was a laughter there, and they were trying to ask him, how is it different? He obviously could not explain it, but he just said Israel is different. And therefore you can see that when it comes to global powers, there is a selective process. There is freedom of press and democracy for some people, but not for all of us. So that is something that is very clear, and I think most people are aware of it. The problem I have is that people are aware of these major aspects, but they are not taking initiative to really understand, on a day-to-day basis, how the psychological warfare that is being played out there is affecting them. People think that they know, but in reality, if you don't take measures to genuinely go search out the truth, you will be duped. And I think this is very clear at the moment with the Syrian scenario. I can't believe, and I know I saw your post talking about unfollowing a lot of people with whom we thought we were in solidarity when it came to the issue of Palestine. People, when we were all together speaking out for the against genocide, when Syria happened, I mean, it was unbelievable that people would actually start advocating, for these terrorists, these ISIS, I don't know how, with such short memory, that you can forget who these people are just because of your hatred of certain, yes, Assad wasn't the best, leader out there in the world, but you've got to have the context of what is happening in the global sphere. You have to understand that, for example, if the fall of Bashar al-Assad was on one of the happiest day for Netanyahu, then if you are cheering on with him, what does that say about you yourself and where your whole Palestinian activism is all about? And this is where I have a problem with the media, because channels such as Al Jazeera, which people thought were the go-to for the fight against, for the real news of Palestine, is complete propaganda when it comes to Syria. So all along, they were never really on the side of the truth. They were just advocating what their country, because it's a state-owned media, and what the country's political affiliations are all about. So I think really people have to be more aware now, and they have to search out. It's not spoon feeding anymore. If that is what you want, you just want to be able to open a channel and read, or certain people that you were following and they have changed their stance, but you're not really actively thinking through the process yourself and expecting people to feed you what the truth is. That era, unfortunately, is gone. So each and every one of us, it is upon ourselves to go out there and seek the truth. And we may not have all the facts at all the time, and it is true that there is so much propaganda that it is really difficult to tell what is the truth and what is not the truth. But the bottom line is, you need to just connect the dots. Sometimes it's as simple as that. You have to question, if, for example, at any point you are in the same camp and Netanyahu, that should start ringing bells for you. In terms of the challenges we are facing, some of the Fra has mentioned some of the journalists, well-known names, but there are people like, I think Fra was talking about Sarah Wilkinson. She's 61 years old, and they barged into her home, and she has been an advocate for Palestine for a long time, not just since October 7th. But apart from, there's Richard Medhurst, which we talked about, Craig Murray, he has also been, he was held at the airport. There are even activists who speak out, people like Professor Haim Brashid. Now, Professor Brashid is actually of a Jewish descent. He is an Israeli of a Jewish descent, but just because he was speaking and expressing his freedom speech, just talking against the Israeli ambassador in the UK, who's actually advocating for a genocide, but it was him who was taken away. There is Tony Greenstein, the Jewish activist again, they are advocating these terrorist acts in a very wrong way. You mentioned the case of Fatima Zainab that we talked about last time, who took action with Palestine Action. Fatima Zainab has been in prison for about 3 months now, but the charges are not, the trial is not up until November next year. So they are advocating holding her and 17 others, in before even the trial has happened. Now, if you look at the case of Fatima Zainab, yes, she broke the law. As Palestine Action, they went into Albit system, but she is not being charged correctly. She's not being charged for, for example, public discourse, or she is being held on terrorism charges. This 21-year-old girl is not a terrorist. She has done nothing. There is nothing in her past or in the action she has done. She was motivated by watching the genocide happening, children being killed, and this is what motivated her. So even if she has committed some crime, she's being held, and all the rules of Terrorism Act are being applied to her. And I think what has happened is, for all of us now, we really have to watch our words, which is like, you can see the truth out there. Of course, the resistance, some of them are now proscribed. So you have to really watch what you say about them. And sometimes you are not even supporting them. You are trying to analyze. As a journalist, it's our role to analyze news. So it's not always a support. Sometimes you are just stating facts. For example, when we are talking about, Lebanon, when you talk about the resistance having been strong and given Israelis a good beating, and therefore forcing a ceasefire to happen, it is seen as if you are glorifying these resistant groups. You're not, you're analyzing as a journalist. But as a result of all these terrorism acts, it makes us really scared of saying a lot of things because we are worried about, getting into trouble. So what that does is now you have managed to hold back the truth and explanations. In terms of what is our role really is, if you are in journalism, to for titles, to make money, then you are there for a different reason. Then you should shut up, and do as the state tells you. But if you are in journalism because you believe in the cause of journalism, which is to speak the truth, you believe in advocacy, which is to change the society and to fight for the values that are for the good of the people, for human rights, then it's a danger we have to live with. And there is a lot of people around the world who are taking difficult stances. People in the Middle East and those in the resistance are not leading a very comfortable life, but they have decided to put their conscience ahead of the risk to their personal lives. And I think it's the same for us journalists. I think this is not a time for us to cower and to hold back. I would say we have to watch the law, we have to be sensible, and we have to try and, speak within the law. I would never advocate any action that is against the law. These are the laws of the land, and we have to fight the laws. We have to fight, have activism to get things changed. But it is not about breaking the law, but addressing the real issues. However, even within the confines of what we can do, that is really our challenge right now. And it is something that we should be more and more of us. And it's not only for trained journalists. As trained journalists, this is our number one goal and responsibility. But I think today, in the advent of social media, every person is a journalist. Everyone is an advocate for the truth. And so I think, people should not cower, people should not be scared, should seek out the truth. Because remember, what is happening in Syria and in the Middle East is not limited to there. When you're talking about these ISIS groups and these Al-Qaeda groups, these are on the shores of Europe now. It is very easy. If they are being groomed in Turkey, they will be in Europe in no time. And their policies of, only advocating for a certain group of people, wanting to kill everyone else and impose their version of Islam on everybody else, this is going to bite us too. So nobody is immune. So if you think you are living in your cocoon and it's not going to affect you, then you are mistaken.
Thank you, Sister Sakina. Farah, we just are left with like 3-4 minutes maybe. So how would you conclude the whole discussion? What is the standard for, because when we look for justice, we need truth. When we look for truth, we have to say the truth. As Sister suggested, like, we are not advocating any kind of illegal activities or anything, glorifying anything which is illegal or immoral or wrong or whatsoever. We are just stating facts, or we are just sharing what is important or how things are coming up in front of us. So how do you see what is the standard for truth, and how we can what should we do when the challenges come in front of us, for the people especially who work for truth, who wants justice and peace in this world, and who wants justice for everyone, not just for any certain community or person or state or something, for everyone, because this world is in a chaos, and at that time of chaos, we need truth, and for needing the truth, we need to challenge ourselves and everyone in front of us in many ways, in a legal ways, obviously. So how do you conclude the whole discussion?
State and stand up. Sorry, I was just saying, I think it takes courage to stand up against the state and stand up against the governmental structures and indeed the deep state. Not everyone has that courage. I'm not sure I have. I think if I get a knock at the door, I might think twice about what I say or what I do in the public domain. But it's easy for me to speak. I don't have a platform as such. I don't have a high profile. I'm just an ordinary person offering his opinion on what's happening globally. But I'd like to pick up on two things that Sakina said. And one of them I'd like to mention is the subliminal propaganda. I can go up to the library at the top of the street. I can look through a selection of newspapers, and what you'll find is in the local newspapers, you'll have local news, which is depicting the truth of what's happening, car accidents, local government, council corruption, whatever it happens to be. And then there'll be an international section, which isn't written by a local journalist. It's written by AP or Reuters. It's taken straight from some centre of propaganda, in my opinion. So what you're getting, and what I call subliminal propaganda, is 90% of what you're reading is factual and true, and you have no reason to call it out or to be suspicious that what you're reading isn't true. So then they insert this other propaganda, and you read it as part of your kind of daily ingestion of news media. And subliminally, that then goes into your mind. When everything else you're reading is true, why would you question this that's written about Syria, or written about the Donbass, or written about Russia, or written about Venezuela? So I don't read mainstream media or local media. I don't watch the television news. I don't even listen to the radio. I used to listen to our local BBC radio programs, Talkback, on at lunchtime. The propaganda, I feel sometimes dripping from the radio, actually dripping from it when you're listening to it. So that's a subliminal thing. And then there's the abuse of power, which Sakina has mentioned, through the use of the Terrorism Act to treat someone who, under what I would consider that the guys in that Palestinian group, Palestine Action, they are working under international law to prevent a genocide from occurring. There is a moral imperative on individuals, organizations, governments, and states to prevent genocide. That is what they're doing. They are working under the Geneva Convention to help prevent a genocide, and to charge them under Terrorism Act is just so that they can lock them up, throw away the key, and say to anybody else, occupy a building, climb on a roof, throw paint, throw red paint, representing the blood of the innocent Palestinians and the Iraqis and the Syrians and the Lebanese and the Yemenis. You could be charged not for vandalism, not for civil disorder, but under terrorism, with a huge penalty on top of that. And last night, I was able to go to Queen's University in Belfast and listen to Mansour Adefia. I hope that's his name I've mentioned correctly. He was a Yemeni student in Afghanistan who was extrajudicially rendered to Guantanamo Bay and spent years in Guantanamo Bay, and told us about the numerous hunger strikes he was on, sometimes for up to 250 days, when he was force-fed every day by the guards in Guantanamo Bay. Totally innocent man, taken outside of the law and the judiciary, treated as a detainee. He cannot be called a prisoner because prisoners have rights. Detainees have no rights. He told us there are still 30 detainees. One of them is a Palestinian who's been told he will never be released from Guantanamo, not because he's a threat to society, not because he's committed any crime, because he's never been charged with anything. It is because he's been so brutalized so many times under that system that they are frightened if he is released and the people find out what was done to him in prison in Guantanamo Bay, that there will be some form of a backlash. They're willing to lock someone up for the rest of his life, an innocent man, purely so that the truth does not come out into the public domain, so that people like us can talk to other people who watch this programme to express what is done in their name by the state. So we have an abuse of power, and we have an abuse of the media, we have abuse of the judicial system, and abuse of the individual. And these are all in democratic countries that have elections every 4 years, when we're told, if you don't like the government, you don't like the policies, you go into the booth, secretly vote, change the government, when in fact what we have is a deep state that will continue with not a government has a 5-year plan. The deep state has a 10, 20, 50, 100-year plan. They've been attacking Iran since 1979, since the Cultural Revolution, the Islamic Revolution in Iran. They're still at it today. and they're still going to be at it tomorrow, and in 5 years, and in 10 years, and in 20 years. This is the deep state that has a long view for regime change and the abuse of civil rights, freedom of speech within countries that claim to be democracies.
Thank you so much, Farah. Thank you so much, Sister Sakina. If you want to add anything, we just have like 1.5 minutes. You can add if you want something.
The only thing I would say is that, the biggest war at the moment is the psychological war that is being played out in the media more than what is happening on the field. So despite all those big bombs and tanks that we see, the biggest war is in media. So, I just would say that this is upon all of us, those who are, in the media, those who are advocating the truth, but also those who are consuming the media. It is important for everyone to be very careful and to be measured and to be aware of where to seek their news from.
Thank you so much, sister. Thank you so much, Farah. I'm really honored to have you both on the show. And to the people, I would just say, if we need peace in this world and we need humanity to be succeeded, we need peace and humanity. We need justice for that reason. And for justice, we really need truth. And for truth, we all need to rise up in legal, moral, ethical, and proper manner. I'll take a leave now, and we'll see you, inshallah, next week. Look after yourself and everyone around you. Allah Hafiz.